Hey, Jonathan. Welcome back to Airhex FM.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Feels like it's only been a couple days, but I think it's been longer.
I think it was a couple of weeks, or I
Yeah,
don't even know.
yeah.
But congratulations to Java Champion.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, such an honor to be part of that esteemed group.
Perfect. So, you are the right man, right? So, you like Java. I think this is the most important thing.
As I was thinking about that, it's been 25 years, in Java now, so it's been a while.
20. You are doing Java for 25 years,
Yeah, 1999 was the first book on it I got.
but you
Yeah,
look like 30. So you started with 5.
yeah, not 30. I just look younger than I am.
Okay. So the last time we covered a lot LSTs,
Yeah,
and so this is the lossless syntax trees because
yeah,
the unique thing of OpenRewrite is that it transforms code, but it also understands formatting, right? So
that's right.
this is the unique feature,
Yeah,
and there are lots of recipes. And maybe as a recap, you can give an elevator pitch for just the open source part,
yeah,
OpenRewrite, right? So maybe
yeah.
just go
Yeah,
for it.
absolutely. So OpenRewrite is exactly what you've described. It takes text and it parses it into an AST and then adds all the type attribution information the compiler knows about, and formatting, and a bunch of other stuff to make the lossless semantic tree. We see that as the data, and then recipes are programs that manipulate that tree, and then
Hmm.
the tree can be printed back out to text to affect
Hmm.
some change. So these recipes can be simple things like changing a method, or it can be something as complex as a Spring Boot migration that has 1,800 steps in it. So that's
Hmm. But the recipe, I think, is this the, you have a YAML configuration which describes what, so you also call it a recipe. So is the
that's right.
recipe actually the information or is it the actual program?
It's the program. And
Okay.
so, a recipe fundamentally is a class that extends
Hmm.
an OpenRewrite recipe class.
Hmm.
And then for convenience, we have a declarative YAML form to define recipes as well
Hmm.
that allows you to employ recipes that are base building blocks that just have options. So, there's a
Hmm.
change type recipe with an option of what type you're coming from and to. And so you can just define a specific change type instance in YAML rather than having to create a whole
It's like
class around it.
orchestration, right, of existing recipes.
It is. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So yeah, because I actually played with it and created my own Java recipe, and then I found the YAML
Mm,
one. So okay, it's also called the
mm,
recipe. So
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, just
So
different forms.
and what you can do, you are, I think, usually included in Maven or into Maven or Gradle, and then you
Yes.
run it. And by the way, what is the output? Does it happen in place? In my case, I think it was in place, right? But you could
There's two
also
options. Yeah, you
redirect
can
it to
dry
source
run.
gen. Mhm.
You can dry run, which just produces a patch file on the side, or you can run, which would modify the code in place.
Okay. Because I also did it in place, and I didn't even wonder, because usually you would generate code and put it in Maven, the source generated, right? Source main generated. There is a specific folder
Mm,
for the generated code, but this is not code generation. This is
that's
called
right.
transformation. So this is
That's right.
like in place transformation.
That's right. That's right.
Hmm.
So what people will do with that dry run task is, suppose you have a recipe that defines like a stylistic idiom you want to see in your projects.
Hmm.
And this is something we've done with linters for a long time. You define that as part of your build, that this is an opinion I care about. And you could attach that rewrite dry run task to build success or not. That if dry run would suggest any changes, then you should fail to build. But
Hmm.
unlike a typical linter, the sad developer that's on the receiving end of this, like, uh, understanding that they have to make a further change, at least they just have to run rewrite run, and then the change is made for them. So it's not as harmful or not as costly to them.
Hmm.
And so then people will wire that, of course, into PR workflows to just automatically run rewrite run as a separate commit on top of a PR to polish the commit, or the
Hmm.
PR, and make it ready for contribution.
Yeah, and this is completely open source, and there are a lot of recipes already available on GitHub, and the documentation is crazy. So you spend a lot of time documenting this. So
Always working on it, but yeah, that's Mike Solomon on our team that just spends all his time on documentation.
Oh, this is one developer just
One
documenting all the time.
developer. Yeah. Yep.
Is it a punishment? Did it something wrong that you have just?
He had an interesting career at Zapier and other places, and so always been kind of in dev tools as an engineer, and then he decided he wanted to be a technical writer.
Yeah, cool.
And with a person like that, you just kind of say, okay, we'll accept the help. Thank you for doing that, and don't ask too many questions.
Yeah, of course. Don't even ask too many questions. Otherwise, he will find out about how cool Java 21 is.
That's
Keep
right.
it secret, and then the quality of the documentation goes south.
That's right.
Okay, so we have now. So I think we covered last time the open source part. What we didn't cover is the commercial part, which sounds really interesting. So I took a look at the Moderne, and it looks like a portal with nice visualizations and team collaborations. And I would like to know more about that. So what is the added value? And what's also interesting, how you separate the commercial parts from the open source parts, because this is always a challenge. I think all open source projects are struggling with it, right?
I love this topic, actually. I really want to talk about the business of open source, because I've been in open source for so long. So let's do this. Yeah. So Moderne is taking those same recipes that you can run via Maven or Gradle plugins, but is able to execute them on thousands of repositories at a time. And the key, the actual difference or the barrier that we have introduced is the ability to serialize that LST to disk. So that's a technology we hold in a proprietary way. So you can, when you run it with the build plugins, with the Maven or Gradle plugin, every run parses the LST into memory. The time that it takes to run that recipe is dominated by that initial parsing step. The recipe run itself is usually pretty quick. And so the ability to serialize it to disk means that we can take those serialized artifacts, we push them into Artifactory. We'll wind up having a representation of hundreds of millions of lines of code at some customers, in the form of these LST artifacts. And then we can sort of mass run over them. I think of this as like analogous to data platforms. It's like a data warehouse for source code that allows for not only transforming that data and obviously making commits or PRs back to it, but also doing large scale impact analyses, studies of the surface area of the code. And
so the open source part, what it means is that the LST is in memory. So it runs once and then it goes away. And what you did is it is maintained in a central place and is reusable, right? So if I would run Moderne on my machine, it will communicate with your data warehouse, right?
There's really two, I think, product levels to Moderne, and one is a CLI and one component that runs on-prem, and that CLI is kind of like the build plugin in the sense that it's running on a repository on disk, but it operates recursively over whole directory structure. So you may have 500 projects checked out in one folder, and when you do a mod build and mod run is the equivalent of running a recipe with the open source build tool plugin. It will run that recipe on all 500 projects. And it's able to do that quickly because it's able to serialize the LST for each one of them to disk.
Okay.
So then you can rapidly develop new recipes and execute them.
It's almost like an SaaS, agent, right? So it's kind of.
Yeah. And so in that mode, no data ever leaves that developer machine. It's everything's just happening there on that machine. So that's an air gap solution. And then the SaaS is kind of where we do single tenant SaaS and a cloud provider and region of customer's choice. Their data from Artifactory kind of gets synced over in an encrypted form, and then we horizontally scale worker nodes to execute recipes across that code base.
Because you're interested in business, so I can ask inconvenient questions. So what happens if I would contribute to the open source rewrite LST serialization feature?
I think it's inevitable. I just think we probably wouldn't put it in open source, but there's nothing to stop you from publishing a similar mechanism somewhere else. I
because
find
this is
that
always when the drama starts. So in all
it
open
is.
source projects,
Yeah. Yeah.
some I don't know contributors, because
Yeah.
for whatever reasons they checked in source code which competed with the
Right.
commercial part, and
Right.
it was rejected. And then when the drama starts,
Yeah. I think if I think about most open source companies, I think they'd be, a lot of them are called open core companies. So like think about HashiCorp and a lot of the drama around that,
yeah,
or Elastic,
yeah,
or who else did this? Mongo, like all these companies. And notice the common theme: a lot of them are data products.
hmm
They had some open source data server of some sort, and then what they're selling is the operationalization of that server on your behalf.
hmm
Well, a hyperscaler is going to be, potentially even better at
hmm
operationalizing that server than the
hmm
parent company is. So there's a lot of risk there. In this case, I think we're really trying to build a complementary, like a commodity. There's this old phrase on commoditize your complement. We want
hmm
OpenRewrite to be the way in which refactoring is described as a sort of standard, and then the data warehouse itself and all the functionality around that
hmm
is something that is distinct. It's like a complementary product. It's not really
hmm
open core. I do think no technical. So if the technical moat right now is first of the serialization, no technical moat lasts forever. After
hmm
all, any idea you see anywhere, you could work to reproduce. Um, so I think it's sufficient.
hmm
The serialization is actually quite difficult.
hmm
That it's up to us as a company, I think, to be developing, way beyond just the serialization to,
No, but
to other
what I
things as
understood,
well.
you would accept such a contribution to the open rewrite as from someone from an external committer, right?
The serialization itself, I think, if I'm being honest, I think no, we wouldn't.
Okay.
But there would be nothing. Again, the Open Rewrite itself is Apache license, so
hmm
you could take that serialization and just put it in another GitHub org, and there would be
Because
nothing preventing it.
what I'm thinking is, I wouldn't care about the serialization, because if someone does the serialization, it will be different to yours,
It
100%,
is.
right?
That's
So
right. That's
so
right.
so if I would accept it, because I think the added value in the project is in the visualizations and the portal,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
cannot compete with it. So I
Yeah.
would be more relaxed and see what happens, because if the contributed serialization is better than yours, you can take it,
Sure. Sure.
right? And I
Absolutely.
don't
Yeah.
think that the feature is the added value for clients rather than the entire experience and packaging, right?
That's true.
Because no one
That's
is
true.
interested, to steal your code and run it on premise. If they're interested, they will do it anyway.
Right.
And larger clients just would like to buy something and use it
Right. Right.
with
Right.
least possible friction, right?
I Luckily at this point it's a hypothetical exercise. We haven't seen anybody
No,
attempt such a
this is important
serialization.
question, because there
It
are
is.
lots of people, and hackers, right? The first thing I've thought, okay,
Yeah.
what would happen? So let's
Yeah.
do it, right? And I just pick your LST and write an object output stream to
Yeah.
disk
Yeah.
and contribute it. It is, of course, it wouldn't work, because it is
Sure.
it wouldn't scale. This complete.
That's right.
But I
Yeah.
mean,
They would try. Yeah.
yeah, and maybe the good approach would be, okay, then we create kind of an interface, serialization
Right.
interface, and you can do with the plugins whatever you like. So it
Sure.
contribute your plugins and
Sure.
serialize your stuff, but your serializer could remain, commercial forever.
I think what we've seen people do instead is, and those that do want to kind of continue and build a platform on top of open source, is that they just accept the fact that every run is going to result in a parsing step, and scale it horizontally on some sort of infrastructure. So there was an example a couple years ago from Spotify. They had a blog post on what they call fleet management, which is built on top of OpenRewrite. And in the blog post, they describe using, quote, spare Kubernetes capacity to execute, one container per repository per run,
Mhm.
these recipes. And so they can get some distance with that kind of thing. And I think in that case, it's like, well, it's just it's more costly operationally by a
And
large margin to do that.
I would say as my opinion is, Spotify should focus on selling music and not trying to run OpenRewrite
Right.
or optimize Kubernetes to run
Sure.
OpenRewrite for free. I mean, from business perspective, it doesn't make absolutely no sense for me, really.
But I always find that with engineers, engineers love to build, and so I think we welcome that, and that happens some places, and some places it doesn't. And on balance, it's still good.
But I think it changes slightly, because at least in Europe, companies, if you are in the cloud, it changes suddenly, because you have to pay for everything. If you run on premise, no one sees the costs; they are hidden.
Yeah.
And in the cloud, if you have to pay for stuff, then it changes, and then you have to be more reasonable. Yeah. And even then, your time is more valuable, because
That's right.
and
it really is.
You could hide it, of course, but if you make it official and say, look, I will clone OpenRewrite and add some secret sauce not to use your license, I will have to justify to management why you're doing this, for instance.
Right.
But it can only work if you hide it, right? If developers say, hey, I will use this tool and then just try, to do something with it. But if you make it official, it doesn't make any sense.
So I feel pretty good about it so far. But, this idea of making the line in the sand, so to speak, the serialization has enabled us to say, we're not selling recipes. And I think that's really, really essential for migration, that whether it's us, an OpenRewrite or something like it, that this refactoring technology for modernization or security vulnerability repair needs to have the rule or recipe definitions be commercially reusable open source. Otherwise, the ecosystem does not participate in the development of those rules. And maybe, I don't know if we said this in the last podcast, but the world I want to live in is one where the responsibility has been flipped back to the framework author. When you make a break and change, you provide a recipe that fixes your downstream consumers. You break it, you fix it. And that only works, I think. If I LGPL'd this and said, I'm the only one that can commercially benefit from that, I just can't ask anybody to commit any resources to that. It wouldn't make sense.
Another maybe business idea would be, there are lots of compliance programs where you can offer commercial in the commercial space, where you say, okay, I don't know, so the HIPAA compliance or whatever. This is in Germany we have also various security and compliance standards. Okay, look, we are encrypting and we have recipes to find maybe security errors.
Absolutely.
For this. And no one in open source would like to do such a thing, right?
That's right. That's right.
This is
I have absolutely no problem with others selling recipe packs. I would love to see that.
But this could be also part of the commercial offerings, to say this commercial pack is certified.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So this is not like, we try that and we can run the test and we can assure you that, the software, at least, some security problems are gone after doing this. And and this could be also, like, how to call it? It would be more like, you're selling a knowledge or
that's right.
Not consulting, more like, experience or which combination of recipes makes sense. That's right. For a certain industry.
And you're selling that experience at a low unit cost per change, which is, I think, the really important thing. If you're an Accenture and you're doing modernization right now, you're doing it one project at a time, which has a high unit cost per repository. Or you could think of a problem and you're solving it horizontally across the entire organization, which just has a very different unit cost. So I think that's the eventual future. I think it would be interesting also to mention, kind of who else is building on OpenRewrite, and I'll highlight a common thread here. Go ahead.
We talk first about the business, so I think now we should talk about the features, and then who uses the features. So because this was a cliffhanger with the business, and I saw lots of nice visualizations, and now what I understood. So we have the client, and the client runs on your machine. So this is the CLI. Yes. And it can run very quickly on multiple repositories because of the serialization. But you have the central part, and it looks actually nice. So there are lots of metrics and charts and diagrams. So what is this added value actually?
It's, in many cases, it's impact analysis. So, there's one of the charts that's there in the app tenant right now, app.moderne.io, is dependency usage, a violin chart. And so you have a question like, what is the distribution of the Jackson versions in this 500 repositories? You run dependency insight looking for com.faster.xml star artifact ID star, so any Jackson library inside of that group, and it hunts down all the direct and transitive usages of Jackson, like indicates what version it was. But again, this is across many repositories, and then it presents, a histogram in the form of a violin chart per artifact ID in the Jackson group, and you get to see, is there a large bulb at the bottom of the version where, in other words, I'm getting stuck behind, or is there a large bulb at the top? I'm doing pretty well, staying ahead of this. And I think most folks, it's just really hard to understand right now when something with you get like dependency versions. We don't really have any tools to think about that across many repositories at once.
So you should sponsor lots of microservice architects. The more microservices they write, the more interesting Moderne gets, right?
It's absolutely right.
Because all microservices have lots of dependency application with various versions. Yeah.
My manager at Netflix used to call this the eventually consistent monorepo. That was Mike McGarr. And I think there's a lot to unpack in that, but it was, the benefits of a monorepo are, being able to move together, but the downsides are also there, in terms of technology choices, heavy review culture, and so forth. So to kind of get the benefits of both was part of the inspiration of this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's aside from dependency usage, what other kinds of things you can look for? I saw somebody last week. I was at
to recap. So if I have two microservices and there are two dependencies to Jackson with two different versions.
Yes.
So I would see in the chart. This is the I would see what I would see then. I would see the microservices with the various versions and the different transitive dependencies, right? Because the two Jackson libraries have different transitive dependencies, sub-dependencies. So I will see the differences, right, in both.
It's really about showing not the per microservice view, but rather kind of the distribution of versions across all of those. Mm-hmm. I know we won't.
So two is a little bit. So if we have 200, so then we will see, 50% are using version 1 and the other one, version whatever.
That's right. Yeah. And so on a per artifact ID basis, what we really want to see, we call it the skinny jellyfish. We want to see a really bulbous top and a really thin kind of, tail going back to older versions.
Mm-hmm. Bulbous top means most of the projects commit to use one version.
That's right. And the latest version at that point.
So what I see is metrics like graph to the listeners, and it means the more microservices use one version, the better it is, regardless which version it is.
That's right.
And if every microservice would pick a different version, then there would be, the head would be thin and the tail would be bold.
Yeah.
So you will identify, so you will identify how different your microservices actually are.
How much drift there is, how much dependency drift. And that's been something that's been really hard for us to understand for a long time. So dependencies are just one example, but I think of another one. I was just at a healthcare company last week, and they were trying to do an Oracle to Postgres migration. And so we wrote a recipe that hunted down every SQL statement, whether it's in a string literal or a binary concatenation or a YAML file or a SQL file looked for usages of Oracle-specific functions and query syntax, and then emitted and so then we're able to kind of say, okay, the largest problem is we need to do NVL to coalesce. And then we can start building a recipe for that. But it starts usually with understanding what the scope of a problem is before acting.
If you would be able to understand patterns, what you could do, for instance, right? So in microservice or microprofile in Java EE, we have, for instance, at application scoped, and we have the classic gang of 4 pattern, which doesn't make any sense. So you could say, okay, how many classes are using the classic gang of 4?
That's right.
And it should be the application scoped, so how consistent is the code base? Is the next step, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And then maybe
And
you're trying to
then
argue
we could measure,
for
actually, we could measure maintainability.
That's right. And maybe you're trying to argue for tech debt remediation right now. Like ultimately, at the end of this is a concrete, work list of things that need to be done. So it helps to negotiate with the business on things that you feel like need to get done.
What I also do in my project, I tend to structure them in boundary control entities. So this is like my top level packages have always business meaning. So if you were on Spotify, I would expect something with music, orders, or listeners, but not DAOs or DTOs or something like this, right? So the top level always business, and every top level component is boundary control entity. Boundaries like the API controls reusable pieces and entities domain logic, and it's always consistent. So it's easier to understand it. So you could also look at such a structure.
That's right.
So I would like to take a look at the package statements, right? So and enough, and then you could see how consistent the code base is.
Interesting. Yeah, I never thought about that. That's a really interesting idea of trying to determine from the package structure actually. Yeah.
This is fairly easy. So I actually did it in large projects to find what's going on. Just trying to read the package statements and you already see what it is. And if you cut off the first, see what is the remaining, and you have frequency of boundary, whatever, you see how consistent the code base is.
Fascinating. Yeah.
And what's also interesting, of course, if you have a package that the unit test has to be in the same package. So that's you can also see and if you could a little bit I think you could also find out whether a class has cyclomatic complexity. Is a little bit hard, but you could implement it actually.
You could.
And then you could do something like, every complex class has to be unit tested. But trivial classes must not be unit tested.
That's right.
This is also very important because, what happens in real world, trivial classes are over tested and complex classes are not that tested, right? Unit tested.
One of the things
this could be also trivial.
Really interested in adding to the LST, and this is a good example, I think, of data that's not syntax of the code, is taking a Jacoco report, the coverage, and actually adding a coverage marker on every statement that's covered, so that when then you do a refactoring operation that modifies that group of statements, you can tell whether, you can basically provide some sort of risk estimate on accepting that refactoring change, which is, so I could imagine something similar for layering telemetry data into markers on the LST as well, on, how hot a particular statement is, but a lot of interesting potential there.
Are you aware of the Azul Systems code inventory?
I don't think I am.
So this is like Jacoco from Azul. And if you run your code, they can tell you how much of your code is actually used because it runs on the JVM. They were already on podcasts, and Han Solo is also a Java champion.
Yeah.
A nice guy. And we are chat about that. And this is also very similar to Jacoco.
That's and how do you try that product? I'm curious.
Oh, this is not a problem. You just we can arrange it afterwards, or you just search for Han Solo, drop him a tweet, and you will try it. So I'm sure this is the nicest guy ever.
Would love to see this. Yeah, I love what they're doing. That is all.
And so it was actually also used, to find out which dependencies are used. But now they say, okay, because we understand the bytecode and we know how much is used, we can show you afterwards, what was actually used during the test run. Yes. And I always needed this information for migrations. Because we would like migrate code which is actually used and delete code which is not used. And so I misused Jacoco for that. Code inventor is interesting one, and you are the third one which mentions that. Right?
Interesting.
Okay, cool. So what we learned now, Moderne, was how you call the metrics right now. So what we talk about the dependencies, it was the dependencies.
Violin chart is the type of chart that
violin
is.
Chart.
Yeah,
it's okay.
It's a form of histogram called a violin chart.
violin chart, dependencies, and now we're already talking about pattern recognition, right?
That's right. So other things I've seen done, there was one customer a couple years ago that was trying to move a couple thousand EJBs over to, a Spring Bean or something, something else, just get it out of J2E. And so that started with writing a recipe on the identification and classification of these EJBs and emitting those data table entries for those, and then you kind of have a worksheet. You can export that as Excel, so you have a worksheet of all the work yet to be done, and start to categorize how you would do it, and start building transformational recipes for that.
Wait a second. Okay, but we are talking about modernization, but we could actually use OpenRewrite like Lombok.
How so? Because actually just inserting the bodies. You mean? Yeah. But
not bodies. I have, let's say, a class with an annotation, and then I write a recipe which sees the annotation and adds whatever. This is just
absolutely
configurable Lombok.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
because you are assuming that people like to keep the code consistent, but maybe in some projects we could write a DSL-like code, and the cool story is. Because what I don't like in Lombok is I don't see the generated code, or the generated code is ugly.
That's right.
But what happens in your case, I see it in place.
That's right. Yeah.
I added the annotation, I run the build, and I see the code, and I can maintain the code now.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You thought about that?
I've heard this. There's so many of these use cases like around transformation that
or for instance right now, so just an idea, I'm working on infrastructure as code with Java a lot, and I have different stages, different AWS accounts actually, and for different accounts I have to, sometimes there are differences in provisioning, right? So this is Java, so I could actually feed in some additional account data and generate some code for infrastructure as code. So
what is this infrastructure as code in Java that you're working with?
CDK.
Okay, sure.
CDK, and this is great.
Interesting.
Because what you can do, you can package the entire thing as a Maven jar and make it and just reuse it completely. And if you go to my GitHub account, if you're interested, so I have like a starter, is called, I think, Quarkus CDK plane. And I think you will start. You can publish on AWS Lambda in 2 minutes.
I've got that started on GitHub now. Hopefully, your other listeners do too.
Thank you for the star.
Yeah.
So yeah, and but now you have to try it, right? So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I will try to modernize it with Moderne somehow. So some code transformation will happen there.
Interesting.
In one point of time. This is what I use in production actually in projects. And it really takes off a bit in commercial projects because with that you can save money. So there is no traffic, no cost, right? So this is the thing. Okay, so one feature, violin charts.
Yeah.
So, what else?
So when you run a recipe there on the platform, you're running it on an organization, and these organizations are a division of the total set of repositories in a company into organizational units of some sort, and there's a hierarchy to those as well. And so those organizational units could be human social units. It's the VP, director, manager, and the repositories that each of those levels owns. But it can also be technical segmentation, like all Java projects, all Gradle projects, that kind of thing. And so our customers will carve up their code base into these organizations, and then you can run a recipe on a whole organization. And then when you can look at each individual change in a repository and then mass commit. I think it's interesting that to the extent that we've seen mass auto remediation, if you think like Dependabot or source graph batch changes or Renovate, those kinds of things, they tend to have PR driven workflows, which is something. It's one way to change campaign. But I think what I found at Netflix is that like a lot of teams don't like getting PRs from external teams. There's almost like a built-in resistance. I don't like to be told what to do, and I feel
we talk about that.
Yeah. And so here you're presenting a product team with their repos and they're able to execute and commit. It's almost like they're pulling it rather than having it pushed to them. And that makes a big difference in how they view it.
Almost like a monorepo, right? What are we talking about?
It really it has that feeling. Again, going back to that phrase, eventually consistent monorepo, I think there's a lot to be said about that. So now that we've got things broken into organizations, there's also a new, I think you could call it almost like a dashboard, like a backstage style dashboard on a per organization basis called Dev Center, where central teams can add cards that represent organizational priorities. Go to Java 21, do, fix this vulnerability, this sort of thing. And when I log in as a product engineer, I'm just seeing my cards. But rather than it being a report card that nags me, you can click on any one of those cards and it goes to the recipe that makes the change. And so it's like, maybe you're not in good shape right now, but just at a time and place that's convenient to you, click through and commit this.
Right. And now I understood the pull, what you said, instead of contributing to your code, you just, no, it's more like Kubernetes, right? This is the declarative way. You say, I would like to have Java 21 in these projects, and you get it.
That's right.
So this is a difference. Not that you just define the desired state with the recipes, and it happens, right?
It either happens through automation or you're surfacing it to a developer to action that at a time. And that's what I like. I think if central teams approach the problem this way, I'm not asking somebody to do something I'm not willing to provide the recipe to action, then they'll actually make a lot faster progress on their organization-wide initiatives.
If you have the organizations, what's also larger companies are interested in is actually knowing what's going on, right? So they are interested which parts are actually used.
Yes.
So instead the violin chart, I think a database table would be sufficient,
Absolutely.
This organization runs this projects, like a catalog of stuff. Inventory of Maven poems, basically, right? And then see which frameworks are actually used in my organization.
That's right.
Right. This is interesting.
And so those data tables that come out of rewrite recipes are always columnar. So it's a column, it's rows and columns, and that schema is defined by the recipe. And so in addition to having the visualization on the platform, we have an API that you can just pull that data table out of a run as a CSV or Excel or different formats. And the intention there is that people plug it into some other big data pipeline or BI tool that they have internally for the sake of presenting that kind of information.
Because in larger companies, it's always for specific frameworks, you have to get approval, right? So they say, okay, if you would like to use this framework, you have to ask, the architects, and they will decide yes or no. Because and why it happens is actually logical, because if you are working with software suppliers as a large company, you are not interested that everyone implements something completely different.
That's right.
Because one supplier implements the software and the other has to maintain it. This is the reality.
Yes.
And if you go too wild, the other will say, okay, I don't like it, I will rewrite it. And this is why large companies would like to have standardization.
That's right.
And what you could do is you say, okay, I have like a warning recipe or alarm recipe. If there are some dependencies which are not compliant to the company ideas, then we can have a warning card, right?
And even better would be, like, suppose it's something simple. I wanted you to use, Java standard library rather than Guava for a particular piece of functionality.
Exactly.
Not only just warn, but write the recipe that would just change it to what you want.
Yeah.
And so at the time you're informing them, this is not our standard here. Here's what I want, you to do.
But it's not always that easy.
Not always that
easy.
easy.
This is, for instance,
Absolutely.
Quarkus versus Spring Boot or something
Very
like
different.
this. So
Yes.
this will be a warning.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. So really interesting stuff. But in this particular case, the local CLIs will contribute to the global repository, which runs in a private network of the client, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So one of the things I think is interesting is and we were going to come back to this, is the sort of other products being built on top of OpenRewrite and the sort of similarity between them. So last year at this was a surprise to us, but last year at AWS reInvent, the AWS CEO got up on stage, day one and said that they had transformed 1,000 applications in 2 days using Amazon Q-Code Transformer with OpenRewrite recipes included in it. So Amazon has bundled that particular migration recipe into its product and then used it to migrate 1,000 of its internal applications. And so he said there was a lot of
But they should send you at least a cake.
That's right. They told us
so
3 days before the announcement.
This is no character. Just silently using. I would at least send you something.
Yeah.
So
okay.
If not money, a cake or whatever they have, right? So
we were
a
happy
small
to see
server
this.
or whatever they can, right?
We were happy to see this still. So Broadcom, VMware previously had written Spring Boot
So wait a second, I
migrator.
interrupted you. So they used the Amazon Q and used OpenRewrite.
That's right.
Recipes, and internally they were able to migrate lots of code.
That's right. Yeah. And so that's now part of Amazon Q-Code Transformer, which really is a single repository at a time experience. It's great. But that's the experience they're delivering. Just last week, JetBrains integrated OpenRewrite support directly into IntelliJ EAP 2024.1, the EAP 7. And this isn't even a plugin. It's just embedded into the IDE now. So if you see a rewrite.yaml, it'll autocomplete for you. It knows what all recipes are on the class path. So it autocompletes options for you. And you can run them there's a run action or run configuration now. So again, single repository experience, but you can plop a rewrite YAML in there, Spring Boot 3, and just run it on that repository you have in the IDE. So similarly, Microsoft put OpenRewrite support into VS Code a little while back in collaboration with VMware, and VMware itself is or Broadcom now, I suppose, has another tool called Spring Boot Migrator built on top of OpenRewrite, doing single repository migration activity as well.
Okay.
So this is the kind of collaboration we want to see on this level.
And Visual Studio Code is I use Visual Studio Code all the time actually for my Java project. So I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. Visual Studio is actually great. So I used NetBeans for a long time and was okay. And Visual Studio Code is also okay, but I can use one IDE for everything.
Yeah,
right?
that's
so
right.
This is the editor, and it feels differently to IntelliJ. So I can open 10 instances in different folders.
It is lighter weight.
Yeah, but I think so. From the feel, it is slower than NetBeans, for instance. If you type something, I recognize a little lag. It is not a problem, but NetBeans is faster. But from the lightweightness, I think as IntelliJ, yes. But what I like, I just open Visual Studio Code in a folder, and it recognizes the Maven, and I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
So I don't like, the onboarding, open project, a Maven model or whatever. So I don't care about that. I just open it. This is what I like in Visual Studio Code, and I feel productive. Actually, it works great. And now I will try OpenRewrite actually in Visual Studio Code.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, and IntelliJ, I noticed a feature that a lot of developers don't install when they go on site. There's a tools menu and there's an install command line launcher, and if you click that, then somewhere in a terminal, when you clone a repository, you can say idea space dot, and it does that. It detects what kind of project it is and imports it accordingly. And so
this will be cool.
I do something similar, but it doesn't work from like the file import. You have to use the command line launcher to do the equivalent thing. So it's something I've done for a long time.
You should try Visual Studio Code just for fun.
I have it here as well. I use that for JavaScript development or TypeScript development.
Well, in Java, you only have to install the Microsoft Java support with Red Hat and just try it. As I would say, this good enough.
Yeah.
And just for fun. And Fleet looks almost identical to Visual Studio Code.
I think it's almost by design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anything else, or we covered?
I think we covered it.
I think I saw you at Java 1 session about Spinnaker. Is it possible?
Java 1. It would not have been Java 1. There was, I did I don't think you would have been here, but I did a Spring One keynote on Spinnaker several years ago.
Okay.
But Java One,
because I
haven't
also
been
saw
back
a
to
Spinnaker
since-
introduction at Java 1.
Yeah,
And I thought
it wasn't
you
me.
were there. If not, there was from Google, I guess.
I haven't been,
And
that's probably right, because Google did work on that quite a bit. And
But I think if we covered everything really, then let's call it a podcast. And
Absolutely.
what I will do the next time, just talk about Micrometer.
Absolutely.
You have to come again.
Yeah, let's do it.
And Spinnaker. And then, of course, Moderne and OpenRewrite, features. And and I'm glad you did it.
Yeah.
And what interests me is this OpenRewrite is not that new, right? So how old is it?
It started. I think its genesis was really Gradle Lint, which was a Gradle plugin back in 2016, 2015.
Exactly.
Maybe, but yeah,
as open source, right?
Yeah. And so
But
OpenRewrite
right
started
now,
in
it
2016.
gains crazy momentum. Why right now?
So it was really after I left Netflix in 2017 for the Spring team. It kind of sat on the back burner for a while, and I think it's my co-founder Olga Kunzich and I, we heard again and again at enterprise customers where we were trying to get Spinnaker in. They were like, "Oh, this is great. I'd love to do this, but talk to me in a year when I'm done moving this to that or whatever." And so I think we heard that enough. It's like, maybe we should go do that. And eventually did.
Okay.
But so I think I would credit momentum right now a lot to Tim Tabik on our team, who's in the Netherlands and is just really great at community and speaking about it all the time. Sam Snyder's fantastic as well. I mean, really the whole team around us is just very.
Okay. This is why this became more public,
Yeah.
And okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. And as a cliffhanger to listeners, what I did, I just took a look at the contributors list of Micrometer. And you were very active until 2017 or 18.
Yeah.
Was crazy active. So actually, you are the creator of Micrometer.
Yes.
And you are lots of commits. So this is like the cliffhanger for the next time. And where people can, where the listener can find, your Moderne and OpenRewrite and you on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you find us on GitHub, you'll find Twitter. But so github.com/OpenRewrite, there's all the repositories there. There's docs.openrewrite.org for the docs, and Moderne, moderne.io, also links to these things. So you'll find they all connect to one another.
So, Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you, Adam.